Overworld shiny Pokemon are bad in Pokemon games. Here's why. Wild Overworld Pokemon were first introduced in Pokemon GO back in 2016, and Overworld shiny Pokemon were later introduced in Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee. Since then, Game Freak have tried to spice up the way Overworld shinies work, but how well did they perform? Today, I want to talk about the nuances of Overworld shiny Pokemon and how they differ from traditional methods. As a quick disclaimer, I'm not going to be talking about particular methods such as catch combos and outbreaks because they influence the odds and don't give a fair idea of how Overworld Pokemon work when it comes to shinies. I'll also be giving these methods a rank between S tier and D tier just for funsies. Why not play along in the comments and see if you agree with me? Firstly, let's talk about some positives that Overworld Pokemon bring to the table. For starters, seeing Pokemon all around you in the wild is a more aesthetically pleasing experience and makes the environment feel a lot more interesting and full of life. It also reduces the need for repels since you can just avoid Pokemon you don't want to encounter and walk into Pokemon you do want to encounter. In some games on this list, Pokemon can appear as shiny in the overworld. Remember that meme talking about all the shiny Pokemon you've probably missed by using repels? Well, that issue has also been addressed since you can just see a shiny in the overworld if they pop up. And that just about sums up all the positives of the overworld mechanics. Now onto the reason you clicked on this video. To hear me rant. Did you notice the theme of the positive notes? They all had to do with simply playing through the game. These changes are nice for a casual playthrough, but once you start shiny hunting, that all goes out the window. Let's kick things off with the Let's Go games. The way Overworld Pokemon work in these games is that a Pokemon will spawn for a brief period of time before despawning completely, never to be seen again. These Overworld Pokemon can be shiny and will appear in their shiny colors, complete with sparkles. This may seem like a nice idea and concept, but there are many flaws to this system that make the Let's Go games one of the worst shiny hunting experiences in all of Pokemon. The best way to shiny hunt in these games is to simply fly around on your ride Pokemon until you see something shine, and this is where the real problem lies. This method is incredibly passive and completely lacks any interaction. If you wanted, you could go as far as just sitting still and finding shinies that way. That's right, you can literally do nothing and still call it shiny hunting. If you really wanted, you could put your Joy-Cons down, walk to the other side of the room, pull up a chair, and call it shiny hunting. Hell, you could be on the moon and technically call it shiny hunting. Obviously, you wouldn't be able to encounter the Pokemon at that point since you'll be a little preoccupied, but the fact that it's technically possible to find shinies while being completely away from your console is just absurd. Not only is this incredibly broken, but simply put, it's extremely boring. There's little to no interaction, and it's just not fun. You just wait around for hours on end until something finally shines. On top of this, remember how I spoke about the overworld Pokemon despawning after a brief period? Yeah, that applies to shinies too. They can even spawn off screen, so by the time you realize you have a shiny, it could be at the end of its spawn cycle and despawn before your very eyes. Oh, and another thing, every wild Pokemon in this game can flee from you, meaning you can easily fail a shiny in two different ways. So not only is it incredibly boring during the waiting process, it's also incredibly high risk when a shiny actually spawns. All that waiting around for nothing. For these reasons, I'm putting this method in the D tier. You get the worst of both worlds with a very boring waiting process, combined with an absurdly high risk scenario once you eventually find the shiny. It's poorly balanced, uninteresting, and just bad. Moving on to the game that inspired Let's Go and introduced Overworld Pokemon, Pokémon GO. Even though this game inspired the Let's Go mechanics, Pokémon GO is the complete opposite in terms of shiny hunting. Shiny Pokemon don't spawn in the overworld, meaning you have to actually click on the Pokemon to see if it's shiny, and generally speaking, you can't just sit around all day in hopes to get a shiny. I mean, you can, but unlike Let's Go where the Pokemon despawn and respawn new ones in about 20 seconds, Pokémon GO can take 15 minutes or more. So while it's definitely possible to have a shiny Pokemon spawn at your house while you sit on your butt all day, I would hardly call this shiny hunting since it's very unreliable. The optimal way to shiny hunt in Pokemon GO is by actually getting out of the house and walking a lot, which is about the most interactive thing you can do. And believe it or not, gamers, getting outside and socializing is actually a lot of fun. But would this be a different story if shinies appeared in the overworld? Even though I prefer how the system works now, I still think that the game would be much more fun and interesting than Let's Go if this were the case, simply due to the nature of the game forcing you to interact with your environment in order to see any real results. I'm giving this game an A because it really encourages interaction. Even if the overworld Pokemon were shiny, I still think I'd give it a B or a C at worst, just due to how interactive the game is. The next games on this list are Pokemon Sword and Shield. These games welcomed back overworld Pokemon, but not overworld shinies. This was an interesting turn after Let's Go, and I really thought they'd continue the trend, but I'm relieved to see they didn't. These games have all the benefits I talked about with the Let's Go games, while also keeping shiny hunting interactive and interesting by actually having to encounter the wild spawns to see if they're shiny. While you could technically shiny hunt by standing still until something encounters you, this only works once and then you're stuck in the battle. Sorry to all my shiny hunting astronauts out there. Not only do they have overworld Pokemon, but they actually brought back hidden encounters in the grass, similar to traditional games. These Pokemon have different spawns to what you see in the overworld and have different variations of rarity, depending on weather and other factors. This gives the player another reason to wander into the grass and actually interact with their environment instead of just hanging back and observing the overworld Pokemon. I'm putting these games in S tier. I really believe Sword and Shield nailed the way overworld Pokemon and shinies should work, even going as far as to adding hidden encounters in the grass. It feels like they thought hard about all the factors that overworld Pokemon and shinies entail, instead of just defaulting to the "ooh, pretty" mindset that most Pokemon fans have adopted. Sorry, not sorry. Then we reach Pokemon Legends Arceus, which once again brought back overworld shinies. The spawns in this game are determined once you leave Jubilife City, and you won't get new spawns until you either KO the Pokemon you're hunting or go back to Jubilife City. This means you can't just stand around waiting for shinies to spawn, which is good because it encourages interaction. The best way to shiny hunt in these games is to ride around on your ride Pokemon, particularly Braviary, and go throughout the different areas in the game. This sounds pretty cool as a concept, but once again, they've done something to make this method incredibly uninteresting and uninteractive, if that's even a word. In every Pokemon game, there's a shiny sparkle animation and sound that plays every time you encounter a shiny Pokemon. However, in Legends Arceus, they added this animation, but much more importantly, the sound into the overworld. This is a huge problem because it allows for players to completely switch off their brains as they fly around aimlessly, waiting to hear that distinct shiny sparkles sound effect. You don't even have to see the shiny. You can just listen for the sparkles first and look around for the shiny after the fact. It leaves absolutely nothing to the imagination and completely takes away from the experience of exploration that this open world game is supposed to encourage.
Save. That's definitely shiny Togepi. I just didn't see which one. I'm thinking it's this one in front of me. Yep, that's shiny.
I'm putting this game in the D tier. At least in Let's Go, you get to constantly observe the wild Pokemon, but in this game, you barely get to see the Pokemon because you're just flying above them, waiting to hear the sparkles. This game could have been ranked anywhere between C and A if it weren't for this important distinction, but this one small thing takes away the otherwise interesting experience of exploration and turns it into something that discourages interaction and instead resembles a zombie-like trance. Finally, we have the latest Pokemon games, Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. Once again, these games have brought back overworld Pokemon as well as overworld shinies, which appears to solidify this as a staple in the series going forward. All the spawns are determined once you reach the area and are reset once you move into a different area. Just like Arceus, this means you can't just wait around for shinies to spawn. However, there's one major difference. The shinies no longer have a sparkle animation or sound effect. You might be thinking I'm going to say that this is a good change, right? Wrong. While I do agree they should take away the sound effect to encourage interaction, by also taking away the animation, they've made it very difficult to notice shinies. Now instead of turning your brain off completely, you have to do the opposite and focus so incredibly hard on every Pokemon you see, it becomes more frustrating than fun. Even though this was a bad change, I do think they're actually heading in the right direction. You may have realized by now that I don't like overworld shinies, at least how they've been poorly implemented in every game they've been in. However, I think that if they kept the sparkle animation while removing the sound effect, this would work great. You might also be thinking, but Ty, Let's Go had a sparkle animation without sound and you hated the overworld shinies in that game. That's true, but that's because the sparkles are a lot more necessary in a huge open world game like Scarlet and Violet than they are in a linear Gen 1 remake. Honestly, if Let's Go and Scarlet and Violet had these mechanics swapped, they would both have higher rankings. To round out this video, I'm gonna propose a challenge to you and say that you don't actually like overworld shinies as much as you think you do. Think about it. Who do you know that still shiny hunts in Let's Go, or even Arceus? When researching for this video, I checked out Twitch to see who was still shiny hunting in Arceus, and the numbers were embarrassingly low for a game that came out only 8 months ago. You might be thinking this is only the case because of the new games, but when looking up the tag shiny hunting, I found 2 people shiny hunting in Heart Gold Soul Silver and Crystal, and they had more combined views than the entire Legends Arceus category. Why? Simply put, overworld shiny hunting isn't as interesting as you think. You just do it because that's what the latest games have implemented. The fact is, if the next Pokemon games don't have overworld shinies, more people will be playing and watching them than Scarlet and Violet, simply because they're the latest installment. It has nothing to do with overworld shinies being a good addition to the game, because as it stands right now, they aren't. So what's the solution to overworld Pokemon and shinies? Even though I've clearly expressed my dislike for overworld shinies, it's only because of how poorly they've been implemented. I would love to enjoy them, but sadly I haven't been given a good reason to yet. I would love to see a game that somehow implements overworld shinies as well as Pokemon you have to encounter in order to see them shine. If you have a solution, let me know in the comments. Until then, you can see some much more interesting shiny hunts here.